You know what? I was going to start somewhere else entirely. I had a whole different entry point into this reading, and then I sat down, looked at what came out, and thought, no, that is not where this begins. That is actually where this ends up. The beginning is somewhere quieter than that. The beginning is that particular kind of silence, the one that has a texture to it, that is not just the absence of sound, but the presence of something held. You know, the silence. I mean, the one that lives inside the space between sending something and receiving nothing back, or between the last real conversation and the strange, altered quality of every interaction since. That specific hush that a connection falls into when something has shifted but nobody has said what. That silence is what I am reading right now. And I want to tell you what is actually living inside it, because from where you are standing, it probably looks empty. It probably looks like absence, like someone turning away, like the particular communication of indifference that being ignored sends or seems to send to the person on the receiving end of it. But this silence is not empty, not even close. Before anything else, though, I need to take a breath and acknowledge the people who make this space what it is. I read a comment recently, and I am not going to share the details because it was personal, but someone described watching these readings during a period when they felt genuinely invisible to the person they cared most about. And they said something that stayed with me. They said it was the first place they felt like their confusion was being taken seriously rather than dismissed as neediness or insecurity. That landed somewhere important in me, because that is exactly what I want this to be. Not a place that tells you what you want to hear, a place that takes what you are actually experiencing seriously enough to look at it carefully. Thank you for bringing your real experiences here. Thank you for trusting this enough to come back. And if this is the first reading of mine you have found today, welcome to the table. There is room. Now, let me get back to what I was looking at, because something is pulling at my attention and I want to follow it. The first thing that came through when I opened this reading was not about them, it was about you, specifically about what happens inside you during silence. And I want to stay here for a moment because I think it is more relevant than it might initially seem. When someone goes quiet, when the rhythm of contact that you had grown accustomed to suddenly changes, when responses slow or shorten or take on a quality of careful distance that was not there before, there is a very specific internal process that begins almost automatically, a kind of rapid, often unconscious scanning, going back through recent interactions, looking for the thing you said or did not say. The moment things changed, the evidence of what you did wrong. And what I am noticing in your reading is that this scanning has been happening quietly, persistently, running underneath the surface of your ordinary days like a program you cannot quite shut down. You have been doing the audit, reviewing, rereading messages probably, replaying conversations, applying the particular cruelty of hindsight to moments that felt fine in real time, but that now, viewed through the lens of subsequent silence, seem suddenly full of possible missteps. I want to say something about that process. It is not evidence of weakness. It is not neediness or insecurity in the dismissive sense those words are sometimes used. It is what happens when a person who genuinely cares about a connection loses access to information about the state of that connection. The mind fills the information vacuum with something, and what it fills it with almost always is the story that puts the cause of the problem closest to home. You, your words, your behavior, your interpretation of something as fine that apparently was not. But here is what I want you to sit with. What if the audit is looking in the wrong place entirely? Let me look at this more carefully because something is not adding up in the way I initially framed it, and I want to make sure I give you the accurate picture rather than the convenient one. When I look at what is coming through around this other person, the first impression I get is not distance in the emotional sense. It is not coldness. It is not the specific quality of someone who has made a decision about you and is now communicating that decision through strategic silence. What I am picking up is much less organized than that. It is more like someone who has gone underwater, not in relation to you specifically, underwater in their own life, dealing with something or several somethings that are pulling their attention inward and downward in a way that has nothing to do with how they feel about you and everything to do with whatever is happening in the private interior of their own world right now. And the thing about people who go underwater is that from the surface, from the perspective of someone watching them, what it looks like is disappearance. What it looks like is choosing to be somewhere else. What it looks like if you are someone who already has a tendency to locate the cause of relational problems within yourself is being left, but disappearing and going underwater are not the same thing. One is a choice made about you. The other is a response to something that has nothing to do with you at all. Let me get more specific about what I am perceiving around this person's interior state, because I do not want to leave it at the level of metaphor when there is something more concrete available. There is weight present, real weight, the kind that comes from circumstances rather than from chosen emotional postures. Something this person is carrying that arrived from outside the connection between you and that has settled on them with enough heaviness that the ordinary rhythms of their relational life, including their rhythm with you, have been disrupted without any conscious intention to disrupt them. What I am sensing is not one clean, nameable thing. It is more diffuse than that. Financial pressure, possibly. Something in their immediate circumstances that requires more of their attention than they have capacity left over from after dealing with it. Or something emotional, a situation in their family or their inner circle that is drawing on reserves they would otherwise be directing outward. Or something internal, a private reckoning of some kind, the type of process people go through when something in their life is asking them to grow in a direction they have not fully decided to go yet. Any of those. Possibly a combination. What I can say with reasonable confidence is that the withdrawal, the silence, the apparent distance is not surgical. It is not calculated. It does not have you at its center as the intended recipient of a message. It is spillover. You are experiencing the edges of something that is primarily happening inside them and that is large enough to overflow the banks of their normal functioning. Now, here is where I want to be careful, because I do not want this reading to become a comfortable story that lets you off the hook from your own discernment. What I just described, the underwater explanation, the spillover theory, the reading of their silence as internally generated rather than directed at you, that is the dominant impression. That is what the majority of what I am perceiving is pointing toward. But there is a smaller thread here that I would be doing you a disservice to ignore. There is something minor, possibly, but present, a moment or an exchange or a dynamic between you that this person has been sitting with, not in an accusatory way, Not as a grievance they are nursing, more like a question they have not figured out how to ask, something they are uncertain about that is contributing in a much smaller way than everything else I described to a slight pulling back while they work out how to approach it. I want to name that without amplifying it beyond its actual size, because the mistake I see people make in readings like this one is taking a small secondary thread and treating it as the main story, because it is the story that feels most urgent from where they are standing. The self-blame audit I described earlier grabs onto that small thread and weaves it into the entire explanation when it is actually a footnote. The main story is what I told you first. This person is dealing with something that has temporarily reduced their bandwidth for everything outside of it, including you, not because you matter less, because the thing they are dealing with is demanding more than they currently have available. I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want you to think about it rather than answering automatically. When someone you care about pulls back from you, what is your first instinct? Not your considered response, your first instinct, the one that arrives before the more measured, more reasonable version of yourself has a chance to intercede. For a lot of you, I am sensing that first instinct is some version of pursuit or monitoring, checking for signs, interpreting the length of their responses, reading tone into punctuation, trying through the close observation of whatever small signals are still available to determine the state of something you cannot directly access. I understand that instinct completely. It comes from caring, from investment, from the specific vulnerability of having let someone matter to you enough that their silence has the power to reorganize your whole interior weather. But here is what I want you to consider. That monitoring, that close watching of signals, that attempt to read the silence for information about where you stand, it is actually making the silence louder. It is amplifying the experience of absence by keeping your attention trained on it continuously. And it is also, in a subtle but real way, placing you in a position that does not accurately reflect who you are in this connection. You are not someone who should be in the position of monitoring and interpreting and waiting for permission to feel secure. That is not the posture your worth calls for. And it is not a posture that serves the connection either, because the energy of anxious monitoring tends to be perceptible to people even when nothing is overtly communicated, and it adds a layer of pressure to an already pressured situation. Let me tell you what I think serves you better right now. And I want to say this as someone looking at the full picture, not just the part of it that feels most immediately comforting. Space, not as a strategy, not as a calculated withdrawal designed to produce a particular response in this other person. Genuine space, the kind that comes from actually redirecting your attention toward your own life rather than from performing disinterest while remaining internally focused on them. And I know that sounds simple in a way that might feel frustrating given how not simple this experience actually is from the inside. So let me be more specific about what I mean. There are things in your life right now, things that exist completely independently of this person and this silence, that have been receiving less of you than they deserve because a significant portion of your attention has been occupied by the audit, by the monitoring, by the ongoing low-grade anxiety of not knowing where things stand. Those things, those other areas of your life, are where your attention is being invited to return. Not forever. not as an abandonment of the connection or a resignation about its future. As a temporary but genuine reorientation toward the parts of your existence that do not require this person's participation in order to flourish. What comes back to itself when given the right conditions, and what needs to be released in order to return. Those are two different things. And right now, from what I am reading, you have not yet been given enough information to know which category this situation falls into. The silence has not finished speaking yet. Something just came through that I want to add because it arrived with a distinctness that I do not think I should fold into the rest of what I was saying. This person thinks about you in the underwater place they are currently in whatever the internal weather of their private life looks like right now. You are present, not as a complication, not as something they are managing or strategizing around, as something warm, something they return to in the quieter moments, the ones between whatever is demanding so much of them, with a quality of feeling that is genuine and unperformed, and that they are probably not fully examining, because examining feelings requires a kind of internal spaciousness that they do not currently have. But the feeling is there, intact, actually, and this is the part that landed most distinctly. If anything, the absence of normal contact has made the feeling more visible to them rather than less. There is a particular clarity that comes from not being able to reach for something casually, from having to hold it at a slight distance because circumstances are demanding that distance. It brings a sharpness of awareness that ordinary, uninterrupted access to something rarely produces. They are more aware of what you mean to them right now than they might have been in the easier, more continuous rhythm of before. And when whatever is currently consuming them releases its grip, even partially, that awareness is going to inform how they come back. Let me close with something that I think is the most important thing this reading has to offer, and I want to say it plainly without dressing it in too much language. The silence is not a verdict. I know it feels like one. I know the particular quality of waiting for contact that does not come has a way of hardening into a story, and the story almost always sounds like rejection, like being found insufficient, like the other person having weighed what exists between you and quietly decided it does not amount to enough to warrant their continued investment. That story is not what I am reading here. What I am reading is messier and more human and ultimately more hopeful than that story, though it requires more patience than a clean verdict would. Two people, one of them temporarily submerged in something large and consuming, the other standing at the surface, watching the stillness of the water, interpreting the absence of movement as the absence of presence. But presence and stillness are not opposites. Sometimes the most present a person can be, given what they are currently navigating, is exactly this: holding the feeling carefully in a place where it does not get caught in whatever storm is currently moving through their life, keeping it separate from the difficulty so that it arrives on the other side of the difficulty still intact, still warm, still directed toward you. The water is going to still, and what surfaces when it does is going to answer the question that this silence has been making you ask in ways that the silence itself never could. Hold on a little longer, Virgo. Not desperately, not with your whole attention trained on the horizon. Just hold on while living your life fully in the meantime. That combination, the holding and the living simultaneously, is actually the most powerful place you can be right now. And it is entirely available to you. Starting now. Tell me something in the comments. Have you been in this specific kind of silence before with someone and had it resolve in a way you did not expect? Or are you in it right now and this reading found you at the exact moment you needed it to. Either way, I want to know. I read everything you share here and I carry it with genuine care into the next reading and the one after that. Until next time, Virgo. The silence is not the whole story. It never was.